drab for much of the day, actually overcast. Pretty cloudy too for Northern Ireland. Some light rain and drizzle here and there, especially to the east of the Pennines. Further south, something a bit brighter, sunny spells, but there will also be a sprinkling of showers, mostly dry over northern Scotland. 20 degrees here, 23 possibly in the south with some sunshine. A cool feel, though, with that more persistent cloud over northern England, 16 or 17 here. Saturday may also start a bit misty. There'll be one or two isolated showers, but for most of us, Saturday looks pretty good if you're after dry and bright weather. Some decent spells of sunshine and turning warmer with temperatures more widely over 20 degrees Celsius, and Sunday also set fair with some warm sunny spells. Goodbye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Last night, we discussed the dangers of knife crime at the Notting Hill Carnival. And have we gone soft on drug crime too? A new Home Affairs Select Committee report has recommended the introduction of consumption facilities, where people who use drugs may do so in safe, secure surroundings. Surely drugs are either illegal or they're not. And is the right to pursue life-saving medical care under threat? Well, a judge has ruled a terminally ill but conscious 19-year-old lacks the capacity to challenge doctors over whether she must be allowed to die. This is a case that goes right to the heart of our Constitution, and we'll be hearing from someone who lived through it all herself. Prime Minister claims the migrant crisis is under control, and the government is making progress. This is what he told GB News political editor Christopher Hope yesterday.
The first time since the small boats crisis emerged, numbers are down. I just want to say that again. Numbers are down. I know people are frustrated, but I want them to know that progress is being made.
But if progress is being made, why have more than 150 students had their tenancy agreements torn up to make way for 400 asylum seekers? Prime Minister still has very much work ahead of him. We also had a dove and a hawk yesterday pecking away at the Foreign Secretary's trip to China. But today, we'll be hearing from a member of a minority from China who believes Mr. Cleverly has stood beside the men trying to destroy her people, the Uyghurs. State of the Nation starts now. And I'll be joined by a perspicacious panel this evening. Former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider, and the historian and New Culture Forum fellow, Rafe Hadel-Mancu. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Tatiana Sanchez.
Jacob, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Some breaking news in the last hour. The Chief Constable of Northern Ireland has refused to step down. Simon Byrne attended a critical meeting with the policing board today, which lasted almost 7 hours. A recent court ruling deemed Mr Byrne's disciplinary actions against 2 junior officers unlawful. The decision was reportedly driven by concern Sinn Féin might withdraw support for policing, sparking accusations of appeasement from unionists. Mr Byrne addressed the media a short while ago.
I highlighted that after carefully reviewing the full judgment, I sought further advice. After consideration, the question of an appeal is now live. Further public commentary around this matter is not appropriate at this stage. Thank you.
Chief Constable, do you retain the support of the policing board?
That's a matter for the policing board.
Chief Constable, have you considered your position?
I'm not resigning.
Schools in England must immediately shut buildings made with a type of concrete that's prone to collapse until safety measures are put in place. Some schools will have to relocate children to other teaching spaces. More than 100 schools are being contacted before the start of the new term. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan says the government's keeping on top of doing all it can to deal with the issue.
If it's in a place that is causing concern, sometimes it can be in a part of the building that's, doesn't have children in, etc. So we have been going in great detail, and we're taking a very cautious approach, much more involved than we would usually be, because the responsible building owners have their own plans, but we are on top of that. The department is playing a bigger role to try and make sure that we just support those schools that have RAC and mitigate and minimise the disruption to children as soon as possible.
Junior doctors and consultants will be taking joint strike action in England for the very first time across September and October. They'll walk out for 4 days in their long-running disputes over pay. The British Medical Association says consultants will strike on September the 19th and 20th, with junior doctors also walking out on the 20th of September, followed by strikes on the 21st and 22nd. Both consultants and junior doctors will strike again on October 2nd, 3rd and 4th. Former NHS Trust Chairman Roy Lilly discussed emergency care during the strike action.
The NHS is now pretty good at handling these strikes. So what will happen, I think, is, well, I'm assuming the BMA will allow this kind of Christmas Day type cover for the blue light for the front door, for ITU, and some derogations allowing docs to come in under specific circumstances.
Grant Shapps has been appointed as the new Defence Secretary following the resignation of Ben Wallace. After 4 years in the job, he says he wants to explore different opportunities and spend more time with his family. Education Minister Claire Coutinho takes over as Energy and Net Zero Secretary, replacing Shapps. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now it's back to Jacob.
The Home Affairs Select Committee has come up with a number of sensible suggestions in its recent report, and recommendations saying that addicts should receive treatment for the breaking of county lines, prescribing of drugs for addicts and medicinal cannabis. It also points out it's a mistake to classify drugs for political rather than safety reasons. highlights the fact, which is quite interesting, that the government tends to accept the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs recommendations when they're to upgrade a drug's categorisation, but are often reluctant to follow downgrading recommendations. Overall, it was a serious contribution to the debate, and there is a genuine problem. Look at this chart from the report. It's on page 82, I think. In England and Wales, the death rate's been flat pretty much for the past 20 years. But in Scotland, it's gone up and is now about 5 times that from England and Wales. So there is a real problem with drug use in parts of the United Kingdom. But there's also a fundamental confusion in the report about the different types of drug use and the solutions that may or may not be appropriate for them. Because we need to divide up those people who take drugs and their reason for taking them. Some people are addicts and they need treatment, and the report mentions the British system, which was used up until the 1960s, whereby registered addicts were prescribed with the drug that they needed. And there are still about 200 people in this country who are prescribed heroin, receive diamorphine on prescription as part of the NHS because they are addicts. And these people need sympathy, support and treatment, as do those whose drug addiction is mental health related. Those people similarly need treatment and help. But there are also social users, and here the law must be enforced heavily. The report has a section saying that drug users shouldn't be stigmatised, but social users must be stigmatised. They should be stigmatised in the same way that drunk drivers are. It should be as socially unacceptable to take recreational drugs as it is to drink and drive. Why? Because it funds a whole system of criminality that makes it easier for those who are addicts who need support to access drugs. It supports and helps the wealth of criminal gangs who are running the county lines and so on. So when the report recommends the idea of quality testings at festivals, this is simply a method of helping social users break the law with impunity. It is quite the wrong approach when drug use, or not drug use, but drug ownership is illegal. So we need a two-pronged strategy that recognises this distinction between addicts and social users, treatment and prescription for addicts, and law enforcement against social users. Until we make this difference, we won't protect addicts because of the link up with the criminal underworld. But equally, we are letting the social users get away with murder, literally, not metaphorically. People die because of the drugs trade, because of illegal drug usage. So we need to be clear on the legal status of drugs. They are illegal. And special drug testing zones will create hubs in which the law is suspended. But Parliament has legislated that drugs are illegal. And it's not up to lobby groups or festivals or the police to decide the law. It's up to Parliament. And as the report says, the main piece of legislation controlling drugs in the UK, the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, is more than 50 years old. It is needing reform. But that reform has to come from Parliament, not from pressure groups. And it was that act that criminalised possession of drugs. And yet such prosecutions are incredibly rare. We may need to review the law, but until it's changed, it must be enforced. But of course, Vox Populi Vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God. Today, we asked the British people if they thought we'd become soft on drug crime, and the people have spoken.
So I think for stuff like cannabis, where it's legal in other countries, I think there should be kind of some less harsh rules. But I think for stuff that's a bit, I guess, harder drugs, I don't think there should really be flexibility, because I think it's kind of seen as a gateway drug.
I think you should be going after the dealers rather than the users and finding out why the users are using.
I think it's the county lines that really needs to be cracked down on and really needs to be worked on.
The real, I think, issue should be tackling drugs coming into the country.
I think maybe police, because there's a lot of stop and search that happens, right? So I think maybe police should sort of investigate situations first before jumping in and stopping and searching random people. I think the country is strict with drug crime. That's what I believe so, yeah.
I'm joined now by my panel, the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider, and the historian and New Culture Forum senior fellow, Rafe Hedel-Mancu. James, do you think there is a confusion that we have a sort of semi-legal situation where the law is sort of slightly randomly applied, and this isn't fair or clear for anybody.
Yeah, I do think that's right, and where the law can be applied in a slightly random way, it is often applied in ways which are discriminatory, and so you'll see far more stop and search of young black kids than you will young white kids, and drugs is often used as the reason, the motivating factor for the police to stop and search. So I think, you know, where you have inconsistency, that is a problem. But where I disagree with you is I don't think the solution is to be much, much stricter on the recreational side, but to have a wholesale review and a reform of the Misuse of Drugs Act from 1971. And I think that should be guided by the science, which is to do with harms. You know, what are things which are harms to individuals and what are social harms? And most of the research suggests that that would lead to quite a large liberalisation. And you were talking a lot about the crime that and the victims of it being illegal. Well, that is part of it being illegal. If you put a trade in the hands of criminals, it will be criminal by definition.
That's a really important point, I think. And Rafe, the lesson of prohibition in the United States is that if you make things illegal that are not automatically, axiomatically harmful, then you create a criminal culture that makes a lot of money for criminals, for organised crime, and doesn't take the problem away. Is that where we are with drugs, or are the harms from drugs so much greater than alcohol that there is a need for these protections?
No, I would agree absolutely about this. I mean, Professor David Nutt, I think, is the main report you're referring to, said that, you know, alcohol and tobacco are far worse than the great majority of drugs that are taken recreationally, including, you know, ecstasy, MDMA, amphetamines, magic mushrooms, ketamine, all far safer. So it is a question of harms. You know, if alcohol and tobacco were invented today, they would both be banned. They're allowed in our society because of their historic use. Now, I'm someone who smokes cigars every week. I drink far more gin than I should. And so when it comes to the harms, you have to actually weigh up the logic of my position on that point there. I think it's clearly a question of separating drug use from the criminal world. The problem is, you mentioned Parliament. Most parliamentarians, I think, understand the need to change the war on drugs into actually a more liberal approach. The problem is, once they get into power, no one is brave enough to actually put this to the public. David Cameron, as a backbencher, was a dedicated reformer for drug use. As soon as he became party leader, he changed his tune completely.
Well, there isn't the issue often cannabis, the legalisation of cannabis, and the concern there about the mental health effects of cannabis and the risks linked to schizophrenia, and that the reason politicians are so cautious is because the onus of proof must be on those who want to liberalise. Otherwise, you want to protect society from that level of risk.
Yeah, I think that's right. But again, most of the evidence suggests that the balance is in the wrong place. I do think that there are severe mental health risks associated with some drugs. And so that needs to be involved in, were they to be legalised, in their regulation, in who can take them, under what circumstances. All of those things should be involved. But if we were, you know, as Rafe was saying, if we're going to have a kind of grown-up, science-informed policy, you would look at all of these things. You wouldn't say everything should be legalised, full stop, everyone should do it all the time. And you wouldn't say nobody should do anything at any time. You would look at what are the harms to individuals, what are the harms to society, but also what are the contexts that make people want to take drugs, whether it's alcohol or cigarettes or currently illegal drugs. And so there you're looking at mental health and other broader health aspects. And I do think it's quite welcome that at the beginning, when you were talking about the health aspect for addicts, I think that's very clear that that should be treated as a health issue. And in countries where they have done that, there are fewer deaths and there are fewer addicts.
And the British system, which came in before we were signed up to international conventions on drugs and still exists in a small way, is actually a good way of treating addicts, isn't it? To ensure that they are treated on a health basis and are provided with a safe supply. That's a perfectly sensible approach to drug use.
Oh, it's very good. In fact, one of the reports cites Middlesbrough. In Middlesbrough, they took 15 of the worst addicts for heroin off of taking it illegally and had them given 2 doses per day, by not having to steal or commit crime, they saved in 2 years £800,000. It's a benefit to the drug addict by giving them a limited dose so they won't overdose. It's a benefit to society by keeping crime off the streets. And it's a benefit to the NHS, the police and our court system by freeing things up. But if I can just say, on the issue of festivals and so forth, I think a key thing to remember is that the reason we do get drug deaths, say from ecstasy and so forth, isn't because of MDMA. That's being prescribed by psychiatrists to people who are depressed. It's because they're purchasing from dealers who are giving them bad pills cut with foreign substances. There are many parents whose children have died who are campaigning for testing centres to ensure that the child is getting something that is quality approved. And I think we should all understand
but surely then Parliament should change the law rather than the law being
absolutely.
The respect for the law seems to be fundamentally important. If it's illegal, the government shouldn't have another arm that is de facto legalising it.
I think what you're seeing here is that the law has such a gap in it that harm can be caused. So people are trying to fill it, for example, like the testing at festivals and so on, in order to stop some tragedies from happening. Is that what you'd want? Is that how we should have legal change? No, you'd rather that, it's been over 50 years now since that law was brought in, that there was a committee of Parliament, that people worked through it, they looked at the evidence, they had public debates, they took all the evidence, and then they came up with a law that made more sense. But in the absence of that, I don't think we should, stigmatise if someone is doing it because they want it to be less likely that someone will die at their event.
Well, thank you very much to my panel. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, should you have the right to pursue life-saving medical care? Plus, is the British government appeasing genocide?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. John says, for years I've had the opinion that anyone taking drugs is directly responsible for the deaths of young men and probably women in drug-growing regions. I doubt many wealthy drug users ever give it a thought. And Joan says, here in Spain, the law allows 2 cannabis plants per adult to be grown at home for personal use only. It seems to work. And Bob, you describe perfectly why drug use should not be liberalised, not to mention drug users driving under the influence, which will become common and put people's lives in danger. Well, thank you, Bob. I always like it when people say I've described something perfectly. You can mail Mogg again. You'll be a very welcome contributor. A gravely ill young woman, aged 19, diagnosed with a rare mitochondrial disorder, is fighting an attempt by the NHS to push her into end-of-life care. The young girl, known as ST within the courtroom, as well as her family, have protested that the removal of treatment and full-time hospital care. However, the 19-year-old's capacity was brought into question by judges after the patient made it clear she wanted to seek further life-saving treatment in North America. The court branded her delusional for refusing to accept her imminent death, and the judge ruled against the young lady's capacity to make her own decisions. The patient's disorder now requires regular dialysis treatment, feeding through a gastrostomy tube and a ventilator in order to breathe. This move to palliative care would see her die relatively soon. Despite protests from the patient and her family, the judge has ruled it is now the decision of the court to end the life of this young lady. Now, you may remember, nearly 10 years ago, the King family, who were arrested under a European arrest warrant because they disagreed with their doctors and wanted pioneering and ultimately successful protein beam treatment for their son. They wanted to take their son to the Czech Republic. The experts said it wouldn't work, but it did. And the experts aren't always right. I'm very grateful to Holly Dance, the mother of Archie Batterby, for joining me this evening after the struggle she had against the doctor's orders to turn off the life support of her son. Holly, thanks so much for coming in. It's very brave of you when you went through every parent's worst nightmare. But surely it's parents who should decide for their children, not courts, when you can't be sure that the doctors always get it right.
And that's the thing. I do believe that the parents should have some say, or family members should have some say in the outcome and the decision, but it's very much all the power is within the NHS and the court systems.
And you felt that from very early on, that you wanted extra treatment and simply were told that that wasn't possible, and then when you pushed for it, were taken to court.
Yeah, well, we was taken to court for the brainstem testing because we refused to go ahead with the brainstem test. That was why we was originally taken to court, and then it was changed and went to best interests. So they moved swiftly on to the best interest, leaving us no options.
But who is likely to have the best interests of a child at heart, the parents or an essentially faceless bureaucratic system?
The parents.
The parents. And in this case that we've got in front of us now, the young lady concerned can actually speak for herself.
Exactly. She's got full mental capacity that has been given by 2 psychiatrists. She's been assessed, and obviously those psychiatrists, I'm assuming, are very qualified to do their job, but it seems it's only if it fits with the narrative of the NHS that those psychiatrists would obviously be listened to.
And there's a great reluctance, isn't there, to allow people to go outside the NHS to try and have alternative treatment. And this was the case with the King family. They wanted to have a pioneering treatment in the Czech Republic. And the NHS doctor said this will fail. And the police actually arrested the family under a European arrest warrant. And then the treatment was successful. And the Lancet and various other reports have said that, yes, this is now a treatment that is thought to be a good treatment and was more successful than other treatments would have been. So they've had to admit that they were wrong, but they don't like any doubting of the NHS system.
No, they don't. I think you've got the Safida Rakib case as well. She went abroad and obviously the NHS were wrong in that case. We didn't get the chance. We were refused from the word go, really. We wasn't allowed to go to 2 other countries that offered Archie help.
And there was a plan for Archie, wasn't there, to take him abroad, and there was a lot of international support for what you were trying to do.
Lots of support. Just not in this country. Well, we've got support in this country, just not, obviously, with the NHS and the court system. I think the system failed Archie.
And it's a very big system, isn't it? Because the hospital trusts have budgets that they can afford to go to court. You are a parent, essentially, on your own. It's very hard to fight back against this.
It's very hard, and I think in a lot of the cases, the first thing that the NHS do is put on the reporting restrictions. For whatever reason, these restrictions come into place immediately. It's the first thing that they attempt to do. Obviously, we managed to bypass that one. So we did get public support, and we were able to push public funding should we be allowed to take Archie abroad or get medical treatment or rehab. But in this case, again, this girl, this family can't do anything like that because the reporting restrictions have been put straight on.
And reporting restrictions are quite sinister, aren't they? Because justice that is carried out in private isn't real justice.
No.
Fortunately, members of Parliament can always raise things in Parliament, and there's nothing the courts can do about it. So if there's anyone watching who's in this situation, just go to their member of Parliament who is always allowed to raise it on the floor of the House, and that overrules any court order. And I think you're so right that the more people know about this and the powers courts are taking, the more they're going to want families to be able to choose.
Well, this is the thing. I think with the reporting restrictions, what they're doing is they're stopping the public finding out about it, and it is of public interest, and the public do have a right to know about it. A lot of the time in these cases, it is our basic human rights that are being taken away.
And the idea that it's protecting the child is nonsensical, because Archie was not in a position to be hearing about what was being reported about him, and therefore if the parents are happy with reporting, it should clearly be in the public domain.
Definitely.
Well, Holly, look, I think it's just so brave of you to come on to talk about this, because people need to know that the courts and hospitals can be wrong, and that we should recognise as a society that parents have the best interests of their children at heart. So thank you for coming in. Coming up, we'll be hearing from GBNews' brand new political editor on the question, is the Prime Minister making progress on the migrant crisis? Plus, has James cleverly betrayed the Uyghurs?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of a mishmash tomorrow, a misty, murky start. Some places will see a few showers, but some spots will see some warm sunshine too. It's a messy situation because we've got an old area of low pressure hanging around, and these weather fronts have been bringing cloud and rain across many areas through the day. The possibility of 1 or 2 heavy showers just in the far southeast through the night, staying fairly damp and murky and misty over parts of northern England, and some of that light rain trickling into southern Scotland as well. Northern Scotland staying dry and clear and quite chilly. Temperatures well down into single figures. Further south, a pretty mild night. Temperatures holding up in the mid-teens for some. Into Friday, as I said, a bit of a mishmash. The Midlands, northern England, parts of southern Scotland, fairly drab for much of the day, actually. Overcast. Pretty cloudy too for Northern Ireland. Some light rain and drizzle here and there, especially to the east of the Pennines. Further south, something a bit brighter, sunny spells, but there will also be a sprinkling of showers, mostly dry over northern Scotland. 20 degrees here, 23 possibly in the south with some sunshine. A cool feel, though, with that more persistent cloud over northern England, 16 or 17 here. Saturday may also start a bit misty. There'll be 1 or 2 isolated showers, but for most of us, Saturday looks pretty good if you're after dry and bright weather. Some decent spells of sunshine and turning warmer with temperatures more widely over 20 degrees Celsius, and Sunday also set fair with some warm sunny spells. Goodbye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and as you're no doubt aware, GB News has a brilliant new political editor, Christopher Hope, who spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday afternoon. This was the Prime Minister.
First time since the small boats crisis emerged, numbers are down. I just want to say that again. Yep. Numbers are down for the first time since the small boats.
It's 20,000 this year. When will they go back onto the bivvy barge in the south coast?
Yeah, we're working through to make sure that it's safe for people to go back on. As soon as all those checks and tests have been completed, we want to put people back on the barge because I don't want our taxpayers to be spending millions of pounds housing people in hotels in their communities. Where we can find alternative sites, that's the right thing to do, like the barge. But more fundamentally, while we've got to reduce the number of people coming here, and again, I would say this, for the first time, the numbers this year are meaningfully down on the year before. So look, I know people are frustrated, but I want them to know that progress is being made.
The Minister, to be fair to him, makes a good point. The UK-Albania asylum deal has largely been a success, with roughly 3,000 Albanian migrants being returned since the deal's ratification, and the net numbers crossing the Channel are down compared to last year, as he pointed out. But in spite of this progress, thousands of illegal migrants still need to be housed, and it has emerged that more than 150 students staying in high-end student accommodation in Huddersfield are set to have their tenancy contracts torn up to make way for 400 migrants. The Home Office plan gives the student tenants just 1 week to find new accommodation before the start of the academic year. So is this what progress looks like? Well, perhaps GB News' brand new political editor, Christopher Hope, may have some answers. But first of all, Christopher, welcome to GB News. It's very nice to be talking to you in this environment rather than you quizzing me representing the Telegraph. So how good is the Prime Minister's answer that the numbers are down a bit, but still students being booted out, barges being hired and not working, housing, hotels being taken by illegal migrants? Yeah. It's still a big problem, isn't it?
Well, it's a huge problem, Jacob, and great to be on your show tonight. The first part of that question I asked the PM yesterday in North London was that the number of small boats arrivals has passed 20,000 this week on Monday. It's 25,000 since he became Prime Minister. It's on his watch this is happening. This is not the control which millions voted for post-Brexit on migration numbers coming here. And that's the problem, and that's the concern, I think. You look at these poor students being thrown out to make way for migrants being housed in this accommodation. It's dreadfully sad for the students. It's not great for the migrants. There's no real option here. He said there that the bivvy barge on the south coast has still not got anyone on it 2 or 3 weeks after they were taken off because of concerns about Legionnaire's disease. Even on the Afghan refugee issue, which passed today, that was a deadline set by the government for the 31st of August to rehouse 8,000 at the end of March, 8,000 refugees from Afghanistan, half children. They are still housing them, as I can disclose tonight. Some are in hotels because of, they call it a time-limited contingency accommodation, because of some of these people are ill or medically vulnerable. They are still in hotels tonight. It's not easy. This is not easy government. But the problem they've got is...
How sympathetic do you think voters are that they think that it's the ECHR and that it's objections coming from lefty lawyers and all of that, and that it's not really the government's fault? Or do they think the government's been in for 13 years and for heaven's sake now's the time to get a grip?
I think the latter. They've got to get a grip and they're not doing it. It's all very well. If you make laws, Jacob, as you do when you vote on laws, you can make laws that should restrict the powers of judges to throw out or to challenge this Rwanda plan. This is a plan to move illegal migrants arriving here to process their papers in Rwanda. We're not going to hear back from the judges in the UK until Christmas, and that was, of course, dealt with because of a judge in the Strasbourg court threw it out. I mean, what is frustrating, I think, for people who supported Brexit, and that's the Tory party gave that option to the country, is that they voted for control, but it seems that hasn't happened yet, Jacob, and that's what's so frustrating. And I think time is running out on this government for this.
And do you have any idea why the judges could rule on the prorogation case within about a month, and when it comes to illegal migration, it takes them over a year?
Well, I don't want to relitigate the prorogation of Parliament. That was in 2019, Jacob, and now it's 2023.
Yeah, but judges can be quick when they need to, can't they? But they've just taken 2 month holiday, so it's a pretty idle judiciary.
Yes. They're not idle. There may be more complex issues at stake, Jacob. I think it's a false comparison.
Oh, you're too generous. Anyway, thank you very much, Christopher. Back with me on my panel, former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider, and historian and New Cultural Forum fellow Rafe Hadel-Manku. Rafe, we've discussed immigration before. Surely the government can't go on saying it will happen next week.
They've had 13 years, and all we get are dead cats on the table in the form of Bibi Stockholm with a paltry 500. All of this is done in the dying embers of the Conservative government, if I dare say, to try to get headlines in order to convince the public. Well, I think the Conservative government should actually be Conservative for once in a long time. It's betrayed every manifesto pledge it's made since the last 13 years on this issue. But one of the reasons that numbers are down across the channel this year, of course, is because the weather's been so bad. And I think it's quite insulting for the Prime Minister to say that his plan is working when we've had 73,000 asylum applications in the year to March of last year, a 33% increase on the year before that. When we have 50,000 migrants in hotels in this country at the peak of summer, decimating local economies, and there are 170,000 applications in the backlog.
But all of this is true and concerning, but you're a constitutionalist. The government can't just ignore the law and the legal process, can it?
No, but why is it taking months and years to process these applications? And why is the acceptance rate 74%? That's a scandal that the media need to pay more attention to. Why are 74% of applications being accepted? The problem with all of this is that the government and the Prime Minister and previous governments are focusing on the consequences of illegal migration rather than on the causes. A French politician last year said, if you want to stop them coming, make Britain less attractive than France. Our message must be, stay in France, stay in Germany, don't come here.
What would you do, if anything? Would you make it easier for people to come? Would you create new routes? Are you not worried about the numbers? And how do you feel voters' concerns can be best addressed?
So, first of all, the reason why we have such a large backlog of people who are claiming asylum is because they aren't being processed. There have been cuts in the Home Office, there's not enough money spent on legal support, on interpreters, on translators. If you were really interested in processing people's cases so you could see what support and help that they needed, that's where you'd put the money, not in the dead cats, as Rafe says, or as I would call it, a kind of cruel theatre to show that you're doing something tough when really it doesn't help anybody, and it's quite cruel. Now, we don't have any safe routes for people to come to this country unless you're Ukrainian or you're from Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a huge problem. You can be someone from Afghanistan who has been supporting some British organisation in the many, many years that we're occupying their country in a failed occupation. And there's no legal way, there's no safe way for you to get here. So yes, I would have a processing safe site in Calais, but also in other major transit centres like Istanbul, Agadez, Tripoli, where we can assess the cases there. Rather, if you want to do the people who are organising the small boats out of business, there needs to be an alternative route for people to get here who have a right to asylum. And the right to asylum is an absolute right. If you're under threat,
yes,
you have a right to claim asylum in
the first safe country.
And there are completely understandable reasons why people who have some connection to Britain want to come to Britain.
But we're
Take
very
the
rarely
Afghan
the first
example.
safe country. Though I accept your point on the Afghans who have worked for Britain. But there are potentially hundreds of millions who have a reason to want to leave the country that they're in.
Yes.
Even if that's the international agreement, we cannot cope with that.
This is why it is clearly a much larger question than Britain alone. You know, there are 110 million people who are displaced around the world now, and that number is going to go up and go up a lot. The idea that this so-called crisis is going to go away is completely for the birds when you look at the breakdown in agriculture in large parts of the world. So what's really required, and what a serious government would do, would seek a negotiated situation with other countries for how many people, under what circumstances each country would take, and then do that in the most humane possible way possible. What we're seeing now is not humane, and it isn't working.
But when you're talking about over 100 million people, even if you have an agreement with lots of other countries, the numbers are simply not containable for the rich countries of the world. There have to be local domestic solutions.
Exactly, precisely. There have to be solutions made by neighbours, and that's one of the issues which is never being investigated properly by our governments. It always seems to be Europe that's taking in far more than its share. I mean, yes,
the overwhelming majority of displaced people are displaced either within their country or in neighbouring countries.
If we want to discourage people...
If you go to refugee camps, they are
We need to create a generally hostile environment if we want to ensure that we...
No, we absolutely...
The hostile environment was a disaster.
That wasn't a hostile environment, though. That's the problem.
That is not the kind of people we should be. That's not the kind of country we should be. We should not be creating a hostile environment.
Only a hostile environment will discourage economic migrants from coming over here.
A hostile environment for anybody. That is cruel and it's unnecessary.
It's anything that will work.
To astonishment, I'm agreeing more with James than with Rafe, which is novel for my general political outlook and probably for James's as well. Anyway, thank you to my panel. Coming up, we'll be hearing from a member of a persecuted society in China.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Melinda, numbers are down because the weather has been bad. Jim, we're the only country that prioritises illegal immigrants for accommodation over the citizens that live here. Thank you for those. As we discussed yesterday with the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Cairns, and Stanley Johnson, James Cleverly came under fire for what some perceive to be an unduly dovish approach to the burgeoning superpower of the People's Republic of China. The Foreign Secretary declared that isolating the Communist Chinese would be a mistake, and that it makes sense for the two parties to work together where it is in our mutual interest to do so. Here is Mr. Cleverly with the Vice President of China, Han Zheng. As my next guest points out, when we watch documentaries about some of the worst human rights abuses in history, rarely do we expect to see pictures of British leaders shaking hands with the perpetrators of these crimes. That's exactly what we see here. The Uyghurs are a minority Muslim group in the westernmost part of China, and since 2016, they have been increasingly suffering at the hands of the Communist Chinese state. Estimates have been made suggesting over 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in what are sinisterly known as re-education camps, in which detainees are tortured, forced to renounce their religion, and in some cases, sterilised. So did James Cleverly's visit gloss over this deeply unsettling problem? Well, I'm joined now by Rahima Mahmood, UK Director of the World Uyghur Congress. Thank you, Rahima, for coming in. What is your understanding of what's going on currently to the Uyghurs and how they're being treated?
Thank you for having me. So since 2016, as you have mentioned, the genocidal policies were implemented and the mass arrests started in early 2017. Later we found out that this was continuing all the time. Finally, in August 2018, the UN acknowledged and that the UN used the word up to 1 million. Only then the world started kind of waking up to something that the horror that is happening in the 21st century. But as Uyghur myself, while we've been living in that horror, I lost contact with my family from January 2017, and I cannot contact them. I learned my sister died in March, only 1 month after I learned this news. And the person who passed me this news told me not to contact them. If you do, that there will be severe consequences.
So it's dangerous for you to be in contact with people you know, friends and family who are remaining in China, and that the persecution has included your family. So you have personal relations who have been affected by this.
Absolutely. hardly anyone that I know not affected. People who never involved in anything. Their families been taken away simply because they didn't return when the Chinese government asked them or summoned the Uyghurs living in overseas to return.
OK, so people were asked to return by the Chinese government, and then their families suffered if they didn't.
Absolutely. And we know many students returned voluntarily, and at the airport they were detained.
And there's very good evidence that this is going on, isn't there? There's been satellite pictures and reports from people like you who have come forward to say this. Why is the West being so mealy-mouthed about it, do you think?
I find it extremely difficult to understand that. I thought when 2018, when UN acknowledged it, when there's so many media interested in the situation, to report the situation. And then from that time up till now, we had a classified document leaked to press, and the thousands of photographs only last year, mugshot of so many thousands of people leaked. However, there's only verbal criticism, but not real action. For example, sanctioning the Chinese government, control the import and so on. But to me, it's the economic dependency. And I think the Western governments really don't know or don't understand the mindset of the Communist Party.
Well, they've done this before, haven't they? That the behaviour in Tibet is a precursor of what has happened to the Uyghurs, that the Chinese communists always clamp down on anyone who they think of as being in any way not likely to go along with everything that they say. And yet the West has ignored this for decades. It's not new that we've been so supine.
It is not new. I mean, 1989, the student massacre, up until now, Chinese government never acknowledged, never admitted the numbers of deaths during that crackdown. But now we are talking about millions of people unlawfully detained simply because we are Uyghur, we are Muslims.
And being tortured and even sterilised.
Absolutely. And the death, I hear so many people. Only last 2 weeks ago when I was in Turkey, I met 2 people living there. Both of them said that one was sister, after 3 days released from the camp, died. And another lady told me her brother, who was about 40 years old, they learned the death. So they informed that this man had a heart attack. 40-year-old had a heart attack in detention.
So they are allowing people to die because they're in detention, they are killing them, and then they're trying to cover it up. But actually, we've got evidence that shows this to be untrue.
Absolutely. We need to have this really unfettered access and investigate to find out how many deaths occurred for the last 4 or 5 years now.
Yes. Well, thank you so much to Rahima for coming in. It is brave of her to come and explain not only what's going on, but her family circumstances as well. That's all from me. Up next, it's Professor Daniel Wootton. Dan, what's coming up on your programme?
Jacob, 26 years since the death of Princess Diana, believe it or not. Do you remember where you were when you heard the news?
I do, yes. I know exactly where I was.
Where?
I was at home in London. But yes, it was something that made an impression, I think, on everybody.
No, it did. And so we have Lady Colin Campbell, who knew her very well, and Phil Dampier, reflecting on the legacy of Diana. Has she changed the monarchy 26 years on?
Oh, well, that's going to be absolutely fascinating conversation, and remind people of the extraordinary state of the nation then. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back on Monday from 8 p.m. Yes, indeed, it's Thursday tonight, isn't it? I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, this State of the Nation. I'm sure the sun will be shining in Somerset, and do come along to the memorial.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of a mishmash tomorrow, a misty, murky start. Some places will see a few showers, but some spots will see some warm sunshine too. It's a messy situation because we've got an old area of low pressure hanging around, and these weather fronts have been bringing cloud and rain across many areas through the day. The possibility of 1 or 2 heavy showers just in the far southeast through the night, staying fairly damp and murky and misty over parts of northern England, and some of that light rain trickling into southern Scotland as well. Northern Scotland staying dry and clear and quite chilly. Temperatures well down into single figures. Further south, a pretty mild night. Temperatures holding up in the mid-teens for some. Into Friday, as I said, a bit of a mishmash. The Midlands, northern England, parts of southern Scotland, fairly drab for much of the day, actually. Overcast. Pretty cloudy too for Northern Ireland. Some light rain and drizzle here and there, especially to the east of the Pennines. Further south, something a bit brighter, sunny spells, but there will also be a sprinkling of showers, mostly dry over northern Scotland. 20 degrees here, 23 possibly in the south with some sunshine. A cool